So let me close this. So welcome everyone to the Housing First session on Is Housing First the First Choice for Rough Sleepers? Or is it not? So, oops. Right, let's go. So the aim of the workshops is to discuss whether Housing First should be the first choice for rough sleepers in contrast to other options, which are normally like hostels. There's quite a few people, so we won't do introductions now, but you're going to be in some breakout sessions. So as you kind of do that, you can do introductions then. And then when we kind of come back from the panels and things like that, then you can kind of introduce yourself, whoever's going to kind of present on, from the breakout rooms. So from this session, we should, at the end, everyone should kind of have an understanding of what Housing First is. Obviously, that is like a buzzword at the moment, but what it is, a lot of people might not know or know to different extents. Just an overview of SHP's Housing First services, because there's quite a few that we have. And then where does Housing First fit into the housing pathway locally? Is Housing First a solution? And then is SHP's what we're going to do to develop our Housing First further? Go to the next slide. This works. So I thought this will be good to do first. So for everyone to kind of brainstorm what they know as Housing First. So if people are able to annotate and they know how to do that, that would be good. To get the annotation menu at the top of your screen, there should be something with 3 dots to give you more options. And then you can click that and kind of write on there what you know to Housing First to be. If you're not able to do that, then you can just always send in the chat what you think Housing First is. And then, oh gosh, I keep doing funny things. 1 minute. Having some technical difficulties. Oh, yeah, okay, they're coming up. Okay, lovely. So, yeah, well, then we'll do that for about 2 minutes and then we will loop back in to see what everyone has put. And then I'll let you know what Housing First is. Oh, for goodness sake. Home with no preconditions, Home First, support once in own home. Yeah. Everyone the right to appropriate housing. Support. Got someone in the chat as well. Right to housing without any conditions is in the chat. Usually get support indefinitely. Yep. People with complex needs. Yep, Housing First can be for people with complex needs. Well, it is for people with multiple complex needs. Based support. Overlapping, more likely to be able to address other issues once housing is stabilized. Yeah. Doing what's done in a hostel on a permanent basis. Kind of. It's very similar, but dissimilar in some ways. What else is there? And no rules around engagement, creative working and aspirations. Okay. Oh, one more in the chat and then we'll go through everything. So try and put it up again. In the chat, we had supporting those that have been hard to engage in their own home, and the idea that with a stable home with no conditions, other issues will be easier to resolve. and Rosie. I think that's a good, oh, more people coming in. Welcome to everyone coming in. We're just on the first slide, kind of going through what people know Housing First to be. So if you're able to annotate, you can drop in some annotations or just drop something in the chat before we go to the next slide. So everyone seems to have quite a good grasp on what Housing First is. People have done their research. So we'll go to the next slide. It works. So I'm going to do a bit of a video for Housing First, but first I'll kind of let everyone know kind of what Housing First is. So everyone was kind of along the same lines, that it's support without preconditions, and that the basis is that people get housing first and it allows them to address their support needs, which is the main understanding of Housing First. So like I wrote at the top, it's a housing-led approach to support and housing, and focuses on supporting clients with multiple complex needs, often with a history of entrenched rough sleeping. So a lot of the clients that do engage with Housing First, a lot of them have engaged with more traditional support services, and they haven't been suited to them, either because they have too many complex needs, or that they've just been through the system and been there and done that, and they're just a bit disenchanted with everything. So some people might have seen this video before, but I'll put it on just in case, because it does give a good summary of kind of what Housing First is, and then we'll go to the next part. So hopefully this works. Let me know if anyone can't hear.
Does it have sound yet? Yeah, Shamora, we can't hear it. So if you
can't hear the sound. Okay.
If you reshare your screen, and at the bottom where you initially share your screen, there's a tick box that says share computer sound. So if you stop sharing and then reshare again, you can just select the share computer sound tick box and you'll be able to, it should work then.
Okay, got it. Lovely. So let me know if this works now.
When you're sleeping rough, you're always in the way. You can't feel part of society. It's very hard to get motivated, you know, to do anything with yourself.
I never used to drink. Well, I did occasionally, but it wasn't out of control. I ended up on the street. I had nothing to do. One led to two, two led to three, and next thing you know, you're drunk.
Housing First provides people with a home and the wraparound support that they need to keep it. It's not conditional on people engaging with other kinds of treatments, and in that way it's very different to traditional homelessness models. But the evidence shows from across the world that it's very successful in keeping people placed in permanent accommodation and giving people the chance to rebuild their lives.
Since I left the hostel, I'm in a good place now. I love it here. I have the grandchildren every other weekend. Sometimes I have Lisa stay with me and all, my daughter. So since I've moved in here, I feel a lot better.
I've known Tom for a year and 3 months, which is the same amount of time he's been in his flat, and I still support him with all things around literacy, letters, paperwork, bills, a lot of work around benefits and accessing healthcare. Also at the moment supporting him into some volunteering. A few months ago, Bench took him out to lunch to celebrate his 60th birthday and to mark the 1 year of his tenancy, and he didn't think he'd get that far, so that was a good occasion to mark.
I believe that when you build a life, it's like building a building. You start with the foundations. You don't start with the roof. And I was being offered jobs, training courses, college, but no housing. By giving me this first, there may be people who say, well, that's not going to work. You know, I've done 50 prison sentences, which I'm ashamed of, 12 years on the streets. Well, straight away, I said, if you give me a place, I can give up the heroin and crack. I haven't touched it in 14 months.
When we first met Wayne, he was struggling with mental health issues, including post-traumatic stress disorder and drug and alcohol addiction. We asked him how we could help him, and he said all he'd ever wanted was his own front door. We were obviously able to provide that through the Housing First scheme, and Wayne has now been in his own accommodation, sustained it for 18 months, which is, you know, the first time in his life he's ever had his own home. He's now engaging with health services, he stopped using drugs, he's not been arrested in the entire period that he's been living in his home, which is an amazing achievement for him. He's recently got a cat, which he's really, really happy about. It's just had an amazingly positive impact on his life.
Now I am glad I got my own flat, because now I'm in a better place and I'd stop drinking. I know once I shut that door, that's it, I'm in my own house.
We've seen how Housing First can be really successful with people who have long histories of rough sleeping and also quite complex needs. It works better than other models because it's so person-centred, and we find that when people have somewhere safe and secure to live, they are able to then engage with other services and seek help for their other issues in a way that really they haven't been able to with any other service. We have a vision of an end to homelessness in this country, and we absolutely believe that Housing First is part of the solution that will help us to achieve that vision.
That front door, to me, gives me an identity. This is who I am, this is where I live, and I can't tell you how strong that feeling is. I can't turn the clock back, but I do have control over what happens today and tomorrow.
So I'm sure a few of you might have seen that video circulating before, but I think it's just a good way to kind of demonstrate how Housing First works, and kind of from people that are in Housing First, how well it works for them and the positive progress they've been able to make. So if we go to the next slide. So Housing First is based around 7 core principles, which is kind of how the model works. So first principle is people have the right to a home. Like everyone kind of rightly said, housing is a human right. So the principle exists on the basis that housing is a human right, and people's ability to access housing shouldn't be contingent on engaging with support, which it is with a lot of the traditional models. Then flexible support, is provided for as long as it's needed. I'm sure loads of you will know that with kind of more traditional housing approaches, housing is more kind of around a person addressing their support needs, or it might be for a contracted time period. So people might stay in a hostel for up to 2 years and then kind of be expected to move on through the local pathways. With Housing First, it kind of acknowledges that people kind of move at their own pace and go through their own different journeys. So by having a flexible support for as long as it's needed, people are able to address those in a time frame that's comfortable for them. So housing and support are separated. So with a lot of places, housing is contingent on support, like what I said. So with people choosing not to access the support, it might influence their housing. But with Housing First, it understands that housing is the basis for people then being able to build up to access support, because with support it comes with people being able to trust the people they're actually working with, which are quite big steps for people that might have been entrenched in rough sleeping for a very long time and have an overall distrust of the system. So by separating that two, you're still able to give people the housing that they need and still allow them to access support, but in a flexible way as and when they feel like ready to access it. So individuals have choice and control. So individuals will have choice and control kind of how their support will look like, how they engage with their support worker, rather than some models which are kind of more fixed that, okay, you need to engage with this person every week. We'll meet at this time every week. We need to sit down and do the risk management plan and the support plan at this time every single. However, there's still set things that need to be in place, obviously, for the safety of the client. But in terms of how individuals engage with their support worker, it's quite more flexible. An active engagement approach is used. So Housing First workers work in a very proactive manner. The clients that are in Housing First have often been entrenched for a really long time. So like I said, they might have a distrust of services, they might kind of be a bit more elusive or more sporadic with their engagement. So the workers need to use a more active engagement approach to try to kind of be constantly in contact with the clients, which is quite substantially more than other kind of support methods, just to make sure that the client knows that someone's there and that the client eventually starts to kind of warm up, hopefully, towards their worker. The service is based on people's strengths and goals and aspirations. So more traditional approaches are kind of more based around clients' risks and trying to avert from those risks and trying to stop people from doing those risks totally, which when you think practically about people, that's not the most practical thing to do, because people, we like to have our own ideas about what we want to do, and trying to tell someone not to do something, they naturally want to try to do that thing, especially if you're not really working with them, you haven't really started working with them for too long, you just coming in their life and telling them something, it might not go the best. So by basing things on people's strengths, it kind of gives them the confidence and kind of reframes their mind to start thinking about the things that they can do rather than the things that they haven't been able to do, which in their life might have been a few things. So it's a positive way to start trying to frame things, and it's a positive way to try to frame things to partners as well, to kind of show the positive things that clients are able to do rather than the more negative way, which it's sometimes framed. And number 7, a harm reduction approach is used. So I think I mentioned this in one of the other ones as well, that in more traditional, it's more kind of trying to avert from risk and things like that. But by trying to reduce harm on a client, it acknowledges that clients are kind of going to do what they want, the same way us as people will always do what it is that we want. So by acknowledging that they have the ultimate choice in their life and will do what they want, by trying to reduce the harm that they'll make rather than just trying to get them to stop, it could be more beneficial in actually getting them to stop than just trying to get them to change their whole mentality, which for a lot of people, they've been doing certain things for a long amount of time, and you just coming in and telling them, well, this isn't good now, you have to stop this risk. Certain people might not go along with that. Well, the majority of people might not go along with that, because I'm sure a lot of us, if someone was to come and say that, will be like, oh, well, that's nice, I like doing that. So that is that. Those are the 7 principles. So on the next one, so why is Housing First different? So I've got kind of like a diagram on this side, which was from Housing First Europe, that kind of highlights nicely how Housing First is different. So housing is a human right, there's choice and control, harm reduction, active engagement, separation of housing and treatment, recovery orientated, person-centered planning, and flexible support, like I said in the other slides. So Housing First supports individuals that mainstream services aren't often able to support. So a lot of clients, like I said, they've been in and out of mainstream services for a long time, and they're kind of used to and kind of fed up of like going through those same type of services. So Housing First takes a completely different approach and frames things differently. So hopefully those clients will start to engage with something different. So many individuals have a history of entrenched rough sleeping. Like I said, it leaves them disenchanted with services. I'm sure many of us, if we keep going to the same place and getting the same result, after a while you get fed up and you try something else. So I'm sure people that have more complex needs and have been in the system for longer, it has a big impact to keep trying to try it the same thing and not really getting anywhere. So Housing First tries something different, and through like an active engagement approach, it just tries to build up that trust with the workers. So Housing First has been shown to be effective for individuals with histories of street homelessness, as the conditions around support are different and greater focus on kind of the smaller outcomes. So sometimes the outcomes that people expect from people that have been entrenched for a long time is that they're going to engage in services, they're going to go to the drug and alcohol service, then they're going to change their life around in 2 years, and then they're going to be this new person, which in reality isn't always the thing that is going to happen for everyone, especially if people have been entrenched for a really long time. So by trying to focus on smaller outcomes like Housing First does, it kind of helps people feel more of a sense of accomplishment, I guess, because the barrier isn't set in the sky, it's kind of set where they would like to set it along the way. Then Housing First is support and goal focus. So like it kind of says in the principles as well, it allows flexible support to contrast to kind of more traditional models. And then support is not time limited or bound to the offer of accommodation. So unlike other services, if you're in there for 2 years, you're expected to move on. With Housing First, is dependent on the individual and their progress. So at SHP, there's a few Housing First services. So there's Redbridge, Islington, Newham, and then we've got a Pan London service. So Newham service started in 2018 as part of the Rough Sleeping Initiative, supporting 21 clients at the moment. So this slide kind of gives an overview of all the different services. There's Redbridge, Newham, Islington, and then Flick. So all the services are kind of started in different periods of time, just kind of showing that as time is going on, people are still kind of interested in Housing First. So it must be working for these clients in some type of way. Next, we have, someone's there. We have a special video from one of the Housing First services doing a bit of an introduction on their service. So I'll play that now for everyone.
Hi, my name's Michelle. I'm Housing First Manager for Islington. So we started up in June 2018 with just one worker and 6 clients. We now have expanded to 18 clients with 3 frontline workers. I'd like to introduce you to the team in our little hub here. That's Julia, hello, Lily, and Denise at the back. Today we've managed to house 15 people who've all successfully sustained them tenancies, and we're just awaiting allocations for further 3. So we're looking to also expand by a further 2 frontline workers. So Housing First is something that I've felt quite passionate about since I started reading about it in 2012. So it's just really, really good to see these successful outcomes and all the hard work that Julia, Lily and Denise have put in. So, yeah, cut.
So thank you again to Michelle, who's here for doing the video. Hope everyone liked the video and kind of seeing everyone that works in the Housing First service and kind of what they do on the day-to-day. We'll go to the next one. So specialist Housing First. So Housing First doesn't necessarily need to just be generic support for kind of everyone that rough sleeps. It can be more tailored. So we've got a specific service, Project Carly, which supports female with complex needs, multiple complex needs that do have a history of offending. So it's kind of known within the sector that the needs of women are very different to the needs of men for what they go through. They go through different things like the care system, domestic violence, psychological and more emotional distress. And the way that they're supported is often different to the way that kind of the more male-focused support is often offered. So women are often classed as hidden homeless as well. So they'll often kind of go with family or kind of in stable housing with partners who might also be abusive and kind of shy away from people actually being able to approach them to access support. So the need for a service like this was really important. So that's something that we have happening in the East London area. So at the moment, we kind of get referrals through women's charities and through women's offending services as well. And then let's go on to the testimonial now. So I've got someone from the Newham Housing First service who's kind of been there from the beginning to have a chat with everyone kind of about his experience working with Housing First, how it's been working over COVID as well, and a case study. So I hope Dom is here now. Do you hear Dom?
I am, yeah. Thank you for that introduction, Shamara.
No problem.
Okay. Hope everybody can hear me. Hi, comrades, wherever you are. This is something I was asked to kind of put together. It was just my experience, we're all doing support work, so I guess some of you can kind of see the parallels in some of the work that you do as well. I hope you enjoy it. The Newham Housing First service started in April 2018. It was funded for 2 support workers originally to work with up to 12 clients. To date, there are 4 support workers, well, 3 actually, and 21 clients, as you just heard from Shamara. Typically, referrals would come through in from street outreach teams, Thames Reach and St Mungo's. We would then go out and assess people with the outreach teams, or sometimes just ourselves, with a description of the person and where we might find them. At the time, all of our referrals were either living in tents, cars, shop doorways, or abandoned garages. 1 or 2 had sleep spots in more isolated areas, in parks, hidden by bushes and trees, which were difficult to find and sometimes in quite hazardous environments, sometimes even booby-trapped as well. You might be, well, not surprised to hear. Most people have been living like this for a long time, some of them for up to 10 years. All were willing to receive some support if it meant getting somewhere to live. Access to permanent housing wasn't available immediately, so it meant having to visit people 2 or 3 times a week to develop a rapport and gain their trust. We did, however, have access to a local hotel where people could stay as a staging post prior to any permanent housing. Some found living by the rules of a hotel overwhelming following years living completely independently and left or were evicted for rule breaking. All had serious long-term untreated health issues, physical, mental health, addiction to heroin, coke or alcohol. Only a few had access to income through benefit. Most had no regular income and were reliant on begging or other means of acquiring money. This is a case study I'm going to read out now. I was going to do the kind of automated voice thing, but it probably sound a bit weird now in the middle of this kind of narration. So I'll continue as I am.
I'll put it up on the screen as well.
Okay. One particular client, C, slept out on the street, literally on the pavement, next to a fire station. He'd had brain damage from an assault by a group of people approximately 5 years earlier, where they'd stamped on his head, leaving a permanent concave depression on the one side of his face. They'd also set him alight and tried to cut 2 of his fingers off in the attack. He'd spent the last 5 to 10 years in the so-called Housing First revolving door of hostels, hospital, temporary accommodation and brief spells in prison, and eventually back out onto the street to repeat the cycle again. Additionally, he had an open ulcerous wound on his left leg, which would regularly become infested with maggots. C drank excessively most days until he passed out. I learnt from his sister that he was a very good amateur boxer in his youth, was very popular, had lots of friends, and he liked driving his car, I heard. Following a visit to him one morning, where I was so concerned about him, I called an ambulance. He then had a short spell in hospital to address the leg issue, and from there into a hotel, which he was quickly evicted from, and all the other hotels for breaking the rules. Following numerous crises and safeguarding alerts over those months and referrals to adult social care, C was eventually provided with accommodation in a care and support setting where he now lives, and he's been there, I think now it must be over a year and a half, and quite happy. Although C is quite an extreme case, his circumstances weren't exceptional. Though 1 or 2 of the people we supported at the time were more able to achieve things with some encouragement and support, all the people we worked with had experience of significant and repeated childhood trauma or abuse as adults too. All had addictions to one substance or another. All had lost their homes through eviction, rent arrears or ASB. ID was a really big issue, which I'm sure you're aware of. Only 1 or 2 had any, which made applying for things like housing, opening a bank account or claiming universal credit very challenging and frustrating. Minor issues and setbacks that would normally could be sorted out in a day or 2 could take weeks and sometimes months to resolve. And it was no wonder that some of them had sort of given up trying long ago, really. Anyway, 2 years on, everybody that we've worked with has their own accommodation, and there are a couple of people who don't really need our help and support anymore. However, it hasn't meant happy ever after. Accommodation has thrown up lots of difficult, challenging and complex issues to address, which require patience, resilience and understanding. In many ways, finding the accommodation was the easy part. And Now some words on the COVID experience, I suppose. These strange days, no reflection is complete without some sort of consideration to how the whole coronavirus issue has affected us all. Well, for my clients, initially, there was a complete lack of awareness of what was happening around them, especially the days leading up to the lockdown, when everyone was beginning to grasp that something quite unprecedented was happening. Despite my sometimes frantic visits to brief people on safety and accessing support, I might as well have been talking Latin for all the difference it made to some people, some of my clients. When the lockdown happened, I visited a client who was still begging at the usual spot at Stratford Station, looking very miserable. They couldn't believe that everyone had literally disappeared, and with it, any access to extra income. The consequences of this meant no funds for drugs. And in the following days, three of my clients, the following week really, three of my clients, not already on a methadone prescription, made contact with me for help to get on one. To date, they're still on a prescription and with it some stability. The months following March, many of my clients were still oblivious to the effects of the lockdown. It was something that didn't really concern them. The queues for shops, empty buses, the trains, empty buses and trains, furlough and the deserted streets. And actually for them, there were more positives. It meant that for the first time, they were getting lots of help and support, and they weren't invisible after all. There were no job centre plus appointments to attend or cruel sanctions for petty misdemeanours. For once, their income was uninterrupted, unconditional, and there was no pressure to jump through hoops to receive an income. One client told me the lockdown helped stop all the chaos in their life and allowed them some time to think properly for the first time. As a support worker, I thought the support from local authorities and charities like our own SHP was really impressive and overwhelming. People were very quickly assessed, housed, and provided with intensive support to address and resolve many of the things they otherwise wouldn't have. Literally, in the space of a week, as I'm sure you all know, thousands of people were living in accommodation for the first time in years. I wonder if this experience will change how support is delivered in the future. Over to you, Shamara.
Oh, thank you, Dom. That was really good. We're going to do some questions right at the end. So if anyone has any questions, save it till then, and then we'll do everything then. There's something that's popped up in the chat. Let me just check it to see. Next slide. So positive outcomes, like Dom said, there's loads of positives that come with housing first. So from some other case studies that we've got as well, people's communication skills have improved. They've been able to develop computer skills over COVID, which under any other circumstance, they might not have seen as a priority to do. Housing sustainment has been a great outcome for all of the services. A lot of people have been able to sustain their housing for the first time in a very long time, mainly because there's not that condition of support. There's no kind of big focus on that, and people are just kind of able to get on with their life and access support when they're able to. So around 60% of clients are managing to sustain their tenancies. Independent living, so a lot of clients are now at the stage where they've gained the independence and looking to transition to lower support or work with their housing first workers less. So that's a good part about the housing first model, that people are able to kind of flexibly work with their worker as and when they kind of need it. Just because someone's needs are now a bit less doesn't necessarily mean they still need to have that intense model, because ultimately everyone wants to have their independence and kind of start to transition into life by themselves. And addressing their support needs. So a lot of clients who didn't have their support needs addressed prior to referrals through Housing First, they were able to start doing that. And one example is that a client took up gardening to actively work on her mental health. So it just shows the proactive nature that some people have whilst they're in the service, and that they're not relying on their workers, they're actually actively starting to do things, kind of work on themselves as well.
Supported accommodation It's a bit
So it's more of a model of support that kind of goes along with accommodation. So people will be housed, and then the Housing First service will support people with their housing and with support. So it's not really like floating support where there's kind of more, it's a completely different, how do I explain it? Let me take a think, and when we get to the end, I'll have a better...
Could I just say something, Shamark?
Yeah.
Could I say something about it? It's just that when we started, we first did Housing First at SHP, which was probably about 2012-13. The principle was that Housing First was scattered accommodation, so it wasn't in blocks and it wasn't in traditional supported housing. It was sort of dispersed housing, so just a flat that happened to be somewhere, wherever, and then the idea is to attach support to the person who's moved into the flat. So it's sort of an individual, like a floating support worker or Housing First worker would go there very regularly and sometimes every day to start with, because it was very new for people to be living in their own accommodation, and they needed a lot of support around practical things, but company as well and stuff. So it's usually a flat just in some ordinary location, definitely not in a kind of block of supported housing. And the other thing I was interested in, which might come up later, is where the housing comes from. And I know that we've got, I think maybe Islington's a bit different because I think council housing, whereas a lot of the Housing First, I'm thinking is private rented accommodation. Is that right?
Yeah, so later on I'm going to do a slide on some things we're planning to work on, but yes, most of the services, they do use private rented housing, which obviously comes with the issues around incentives and landlords' willingness to want to rent to people with multiple complex needs because of the stigmas around that. Islington is in a bit of a better position where they do get their housing through the local authority. So there's more of a direct stream, but we're starting to work on some things and some direct links with housing associations to hopefully have that more stable housing for people to have, because PRS, it kind of changes as the wind, as the landlord's mind changes, which for our clients isn't the most stable form of housing that anyone could have, really.
Like, do you accept referrals from other organizations?
Do you want me to give a bit of an overview? Have we got time? It might just be, I manage the Islington Housing First. So basically we're trying to reach people who've got long histories of entrenched rough sleeping and have multiple needs. So that could be mental health, substance use, physical health. And they get referred into our service via, mainly by the street population workers and outreach workers. And they come via the local authority. We're very, very lucky. We're in a very strong position of where the local authority want to work with us, and they house people in their stock. So everybody who's identified in Islington will remain in Islington, where I think the other Housing First projects, they don't have that. They have to go private rented, so it could be anywhere, and that's a whole other challenge. We don't have that. We're very, very lucky. We work hand in hand with the local authority to find suitable accommodation so people have choice on where they live, which is really, really important. The type of accommodation they want, how they want it furnished. And that's where we start. All we're looking for is, do you want your own flat? Is this something that's important to you? And that's where we start, and we try to build up a relationship and trust with that client, because what's key to Housing First is relationships. It's building really solid, trusting relationships where maybe other services have failed at people, and the 3 strikes and you're out rule. We don't have that. We're like, we're here. We want to know what your aspirations and wants are for your future, and then we build in holistic support around that. So it might be linking in with substance use services. It really does get led by the client. We work in a psychologically informed manner. It's all about understanding where that client's coming from, the backgrounds. Many have had adverse childhood experiences, so we work with that. So a lot of frontline workers are kind of really experienced and understand the trauma that people have experienced in their life. So it's kind of going in from that level is, I want to get to know you and what you want in your life, rather than you're a problem, which is kind of traditionally what happens. People who nobody can reach, nobody can work with, they're too problematic. And that's kind of the traditional view of the people we're working with, where now we see the person. And it's kind of very in keeping with SHP anyway, and how we work. So we're going in to provide holistic support to people, but it's very much led by them. So that's kind of a little bit of a snippet of.
Thank you, Michelle.
Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about caseloads? I'm just curious because, as you've pointed out, it's really intensive support, and you might need to go to someone every day. And obviously, if you've got clients all around the borough, there's travel time within that. I mean, do the caseloads sort of work for the services the way they are?
Yep, so it's a maximum caseload of 7, correct me if I'm wrong, and caseload shouldn't go above that to ensure that each client is able to kind of get that intensive support, which is a lot more than kind of what they get in any other service on a daily basis or whatever the client would need. So the caseload shouldn't go above that, because then obviously the type of support they'll be able to get will go down. I've known some services kind of across the country to do different things. Some services might have 8, some services might have 6, but then it obviously depends on the type of clients that you have and how intense their support needs are. Any more questions before we go on? Lovely, so I'll go on to the next slide. Go on to hostels now. So like I said, the whole thing of this presentation is to kind of do a comparison and see, is housing first the option, is hostels the option, is a combination of both, so kind of what works for people with multiple complex needs. So hostels, the general characteristics is that they're a physical space, so there's communal spaces in there. There's normally a shared living space, so there might be a shared space where people have their meals, and then everyone will kind of have their rooms, and it's normally shared bathrooms and things like that. There might be a social space, some places do, some places don't, where kind of clients can interact and just people might have some activities in there and things like that. And the agreements around kind of people staying there is different. So some is less likely to be a tenancy and more likely to be things like a license. So hostels have been around for a very long time and are kind of the most used approach to kind of house people with complex needs. They exist in most local authorities in some shape or form. There's generally 3 categories of hostel, which was kind of defined by Homeless Link. So there's emergency hostels, which make up 20% of the hostel stock. Then there's second stage, and then there's specialists. So second stage is the most prominent type of hostel stock, which is 73%. And then specialist hostels, which are kind of more supported to either might be specialist substance misuse or specific support needs that clients might have. And they make up 7%. So examples of emergency are kind of winter shelters, night shelters, and kind of direct access shelters. Second stage are kind of low support to high support access hostels, kind of foyer hostels, which are kind of normally youth services and housing schemes. And then traditional commissioned specialist approaches to kind of work with specific groups of people. So in general, the kind of purpose for hostels is, as you'd kind of expect, to kind of support independence of people, offering safety and security by kind of just giving people a place to call their home, providing opportunities. So places might have different activities. They might have different services locally that might come in and do like drop-ins to help people with certain things. Key working support, just for people to have their own key worker, work with their key worker actively on kind of their support needs and what their goals are moving forward. Trying to develop some meaningful activities. So some hostels might have like a gardening area where they do certain things with their clients and just try to get their clients involved in different things that they don't normally do. And access to specialist support. So some places might have in-house drug and alcohol drop-ins and things like that. And like with Housing First, once somebody has somewhere to stay, it kind of allows them to have that stable base to then start engaging with different services. So supporting clients with multiple complex needs. So as Housing First is kind of the newer solution to housing clients, hostels are still kind of widely commissioned to support clients, but there's a lot of different opinions about hostels in the sector. Well, do they work? Do they not work? So one of the questions that a lot of people ask is, do they actually address clients' needs? So do they develop independence, and do they address short-term and long-term needs? Obviously, people move into hostels to address housing, which is an immediate need. But long-term, do they actually continue to work with people to address the longer-term needs around their independence, maybe abstaining from drugs and things like that? Do hostels actually facilitate that environment to do that? There's a lot of mixed opinion, like I said. So some people might see them as old-fashioned and kind of fill in the gap where there's a group of people that do have quite complex needs and can't fit into many different pathways. And some people see it as a much needed support provision in local boroughs to kind of support those clients in a way that more general needs places might not be able to. Then there's varying structures. So some hostels are commissioned, some are non-commissioned. The way that they operate can be completely contrasting in different ways. Obviously, SHP is very pie focused, so hostels that we'd have would be more pie inclined and things like that. But some non-commission focus, non-commission hostels, they can still be quite institutional, where people need to be in and out certain times. They need to, their alcohol content might be controlled and things like that, which doesn't really take into account people's personal needs and things like that. Some are pie focused, like I said, with more structured support, and some have less personalized support. The size and quality, there's some very vast hostels and there's some very small ones. So it's just kind of how effective is each size in kind of helping support the people that are actually there. And are the rules actually effective? Like I was saying earlier, once you tell people to do things, especially adults, once you tell us to do something or tell us not to do something, are we actually going to be likely to do that? So are the rules and kind of the measures you put in place to kind of, as you try to help people, are they actually helping them? So there's a lot of questions around that and around hostels in general. So we'll do the breakout session and a case study discussion now to kind of get you thinking about hostels and Housing First. So I started the beginning of the case study, which is, so there's a woman called Sarah. This is a real case study from one of our services. She's a 35-year-old woman with a long history of rough sleeping who recently became homeless after her family lost their housing due to issues such as antisocial behaviour and Sarah taking her sex work clients back to the property. Sarah wasn't rehoused with her family and struggled to make her own homelessness application. She's got a variety of needs, including substance abuse, mental health issues, serious domestic violence, and being subject to a care order. So what I'd like everyone to do once I put you in the breakout rooms is to kind of think what Sarah's path of support would look like if she was supported into a hostel, and what it would look like if she was supported through Housing First. So I'll type some notes in the chat so everyone can see whilst they go into the breakout room. So I've added some bits at the bottom. So just thinking about how would her support needs be addressed? What would her move on look like if it was to happen? What would kind of be the expectations around her engagement with support? Would she be expected to engage in activities? I've written activities twice. No problem. And then I will bring everyone back after 15 minutes. So what I'd like everyone to do is for the first 5 minutes to kind of focus on what Sarah's path of support would look like from the time of going into the hostel, and then what her support would look like. Then for the next 5 minutes, I'd like everyone to think about what it would look like if she was supported through Housing First. And then I will broadcast a message for the last 5 minutes for a plot twist, for you to then think about how this plot twist would then affect her accessing support with either a hostel and Housing First, and which method would be the most possible for her with this new information. So has anyone got any questions before I assemble everything? I'll take that as a no. So let me start organizing the break. 1. Oh, thank you. So we've got a couple co-facilitators that will be floating in and out, and I'll float in and out the rooms as well, just to make sure everyone's okay. So I will put everyone into, there'll be 5 breakout rooms, about 4 to 5 people between, and then I'll put everyone into that now, and I'll broadcast a message when the 5 minutes has ended, when the 10 minutes has ended, and then I'll send over the message for what that is as well. So I'll do that now.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Oh, we've got a 5th member with us, Denise. Oh, and
Oh, Wally.
Sinead, are you in this group or are you in a different session?
I am, but I'm trying to keep social distancing as well.
Oh, I was talking about the cat, but nice to see you also.
Right, so I'm actually a Housing First worker, just to let you know.
Great. And it's Helen, right?
Yes.
Helen, you work in a hostel, don't you?
Yes.
So we've got some good representation for both the questions. So the first question was, what would Sarah's path of support look like, and what would be expected of Sarah if she's supported in a hostel?
Do you want me to go on?
Yeah, go for it. Why not?
Okay. Sarah.
Yeah, it was okay.
So we'll do a quick feedback. So if everyone, so one person from each group can just quickly feedback on kind of what it would look like if she went into a hostel, or if she went through Housing First, and kind of what impact the new information that I gave would have. I know some people got a bit confused, so don't feel any pressure to kind of explain what you're not able to. And yeah, at the end, if anyone's got any additional questions, I'm hanging on to have a chat with a couple people, so feel free to hang on then. But if we start with breakout room 1, so that was the room with Dom.
I suppose that means I'll have to say something then. I mean, we talked about our own experiences really, and some of the crossovers with some of the clients that we're working with at the minute. And with all Housing First clients of that profile, it was kind of difficult really to kind of state concretely what we would or what we wouldn't do. But what we did all kind of agree on pretty much was that with Housing First, the door is always open if somebody is in another part of the country, say, or the city, and potentially wants to return. Yeah, we wouldn't enforce any particular kind of obligations on them in the short term, shall we say. I don't know whether anybody else would, who was in the group, would agree or disagree with that. I want to add anything.
Yeah, I think Housing First always wins in terms of the flexibility of support. I think the only plus point for hostels that we were talking about was around the sort of socialising aspect and having people around and not being lonely, but obviously you can counter that within a Housing First model.
Lovely. So we're not going to have time to hear feedback from everyone, but if one person can kind of type in the chat what the kind of key points from their group was, that would be great. So I'll move on to the next slide because we're running over slightly. So that was just the outcome of kind of the case study and where Sarah eventually ended up and how things positively progressed with her. All the slides and everything is going to go round so everyone can read that after, just having to rush a bit now. And is housing first a solution is the question that I kind of wanted to ask after everything. So like Dom kind of rightly said, because it's such a flexible option, when things do happen in life, like an unfortunate thing, someone is trafficked and then they decide to settle somewhere else, it does have the flexibility to kind of continue working with people and kind of signpost them to places in the new area. Whereas if someone is to be in a hostel and leave, after a while they've abandoned essentially. So the support does essentially come to an end unless you do have that worker that's willing to kind of go a bit extra to continue working with someone. So is it for everyone? Housing as a human right, of course, is for everyone, but like with any type of model, it's not one size fits all. Housing first might not work with some people if they don't want to have the genuine need for housing, which is kind of the underlying basis of housing first, which some people, they might not be at the stage to get yet, or they might have some additional support needs that might kind of push them towards getting into housing. How effective is it? So there's something called the fidelity to the model. So earlier I spoke about the 7 principles of housing first. The closer that people are to those principles and kind of abide by those is how effective that housing first can be seen to be. Can it provide specialist support? Yes, it can. We're seeing that through the service we have, Project Carly. There's other services across the country as well, doing kind of young people's housing first and a lot more specific services for more niche groups of people. And the national picture, so housing first is kind of like the buzzword at the moment. There's loads of different things happening across the country. Ministry of Housing have funded 3 pilots in the country as well. Crisis have recently launched a pan-London housing first service. So it just kind of goes to show that people are kind of starting to take up this approach that people need housing first, and then they can start to address their support needs rather than kind of what the normal model is the other way around. And ambitions for housing first at SHP. So I think Liz mentioned earlier about the housing and how that works. So at the moment, a lot of the services rely on private rented sector housing. That is obviously a bit of a challenge when working with people with multiple complex needs. So what we're trying to do at the moment is develop those links to social housing providers to kind of get direct access through that. In Redbridge as well, the local authority, they're very on board with housing first, so they're directly trying to start sourcing social housing places within the borough for the clients that do work with housing first. Peer support, I can't remember who mentioned social interaction, but things like peer support and social interaction are important because obviously housing first isn't an accommodation-based service. People might end up a bit isolated in the community. So things like peer support and people that they can interact with outside of just their normal social circle and their support worker is something that would always be useful. Psychological input is something that we want to try to integrate more as well. There's a big overlap kind of between PI and housing first in the way that they try to take people's support needs and use that to support a person rather than kind of have a one size fits all model for every single person. So we're trying to integrate that more and want to eventually have a more in-house offer of psychological support for housing first, and an in-house training offer for staff when they start. So at the moment, there's not an in-house offer for housing first staff when they start. And that's one of the things that we want to start doing quite soon, align with Flick as well, to kind of have that offer in place, to kind of have staff access training to understand like the basic core principles of housing first when they do start. So any questions? We've run a bit over, so if anyone's happy to stay for any questions, I'm happy to stay and answer anything. But yeah, thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you for participating in everything. I know some people might need to pop off. They've already said in the chat they need to. But yeah, happy to answer any questions for anyone that's able to stay.
I am going to go, Shamara, but it was great. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Interesting session. I've learned a bit more about housing first today. I want to try and catch up with any last minute emails before I sign off for the day. But yeah, thank you very much.
No problem.
I'm going to leave you for questions, Shamara. I'll catch up with you later.
No, thank you.
Thanks.
Shamara, I have a question.
Yep.
Oh, were we meant to be putting them into the chat?
No, you can say the question, type the question, whatever you like.
I just had a question about the funding and like, are you finding that some local authorities are kind of receptive to this idea and that's why they're willing to fund it? Or are you finding more, like, where is the funding coming from for Housing First? Because it just seems like there's longer term support. So
yeah, so the fundings come from different places. So I think I was explaining in one of the breakout rooms, some of it is funded through kind of government funding. Some local authorities have directly funded it themselves. And some of it, so like more specific services can be funded through like more tailored routes. So for example, offending services, there's something called MOPAC, so Mayor's Office of Policing. They kind of work on offending services and they kind of lead on that. So they've obviously provided funding towards that. So the funding comes from different streams. I think your question around the longevity of funding is important as well, because like you said, it's long-term support. So as long as the local authorities are on board, hopefully things can continue in some type of fashion. It might not be able to continue in the same capacity, but hopefully once it's on board, it can just be kind of merged into other things and kind of just continued on.
yeah, because I just have a really quick follow-up question. I was just wondering, because usually with these kind of things, actually financially it works out better to do this kind of long-term support than to, you know, do this crisis management and then leave them and think, oh, I hope they'll be okay. And then of course, a few months down the line, maybe they just collapse again. And then you have to refer them again. That's the council spending their time and effort and money, you know, their resources, and then you again. And it just seems like maybe people are coming around to the idea that it's actually more financially efficient to just give them the support for as long as they need it.
Yeah, so
can I just add to that? So our new Housing First service actually is being evaluated by the London School of Science and economics to see whether it's actually a cost-effective model, you know. So the theory is it is in the long term, that initially there's a higher cost in implementing it, but then in the long run, when admissions to like A&E and hospitals and things like that being reduced, the overall there is like a cost-effective model. But yeah, we're just waiting for the evaluation to actually come out and to prove it, whether or not that's the case.
Yeah, I've got a question. What we're trying to ask then, because the way we work, we do support clients that are already in temporary accommodation to sort move them into the private rented sector. And most of these clients, they come with high need, they need referral to mental health organization, maybe they have issue with alcohol misuse, maybe domestic violence. So we were wondering if you have your own properties, or even if you don't, do you like accept referral from people? Like, can we refer clients to your organization to Housing First? So that was what we were trying to find out, the way this Housing First works.
Okay, so I can't remember who mentioned, but I think it might have been Michelle. So referrals come through the local authority, and then obviously we will then assess whether that person is appropriate for Housing First, and then put them into the appropriate housing, and then continue to support them like that. So where do you work currently?
Single Homeless Prevention Service, Infit Council.
Okay, so at the moment we don't have a Housing First service in Enfield, so you wouldn't be able to refer into the service. So it might be something looking at within the service. If you have a lot of high needs clients, how can you guys start addressing that in kind of a more informed way?
Yeah, okay. All right. So your referrals only come from councils?
So from local authorities mainly. For our other services like Project Carly and things like that, we'll get referrals sometimes through women's specific charities for the higher needs women that might need to be in the more tailored support.
Okay. Okay, I get what you mean. All right. All right, thank you so much.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I think my question has been addressed anyway, so I don't have any other further question, but thank you so much. It's really, really informative, and I really enjoy being part of it.
No problem.
I'll probably have to go now. I do have a couple of personal housing plans to send out, so to catch up with other emails as well.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. No problem.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Does anyone else have any questions before I close the session? If you do and you don't want to say it now or anything, you can always drop me an email. I can put my email in the group chat. Right. Well, I'm going to stop this session now. Thank you for everyone for coming. Like I said, if you've got any more questions, feel free to drop me an email or anything. But yeah, bye everyone.